All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here today. We have an amazing group here today from our Student Access Center to talk us through accessibility, universal design concepts in online and how we can make sure that we're best addressing those concerns for our students and developing content as we go. So please feel free to add any questions that you have to the chat, and we will be monitoring those and either answer them as we go or sort of at the end of the presentation, depending on the context. But we want this to be participatory, give scenarios or any questions that you might have. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the team to get started and go.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, I'm Jason Maceberg Tomlinson, and I'm here with Ann Pierce and Natalie Behari from the Student Access Center, and we're going to talk accessibility in the online realm and from a couple different angles, and talk a little bit about the experience of students with disabilities in that remote learning situation. And this kind of started, as we were moving in spring online, and we're working with a lot of students, and the experiences we're going to talk about today are a lot with students who aren't necessarily, they didn't intend to enroll online, but as academics in 2020 go, they're participating online in new ways and to continue with their learning, and we will make sure that's a good experience for them and, most importantly, an accessible experience. So I'm going to ask Ann to switch the slides periodically. Go ahead, Ann. And we'll walk through what we do. And so like Laura said, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll answer them later, and Laura will help us guide through those questions. And this is a good conversation. Many of you know me. I like a good conversation instead of just a full lecture, and that's how we learn. That's how we kind of realize the ideas that are out there and new and unique experiences, and mesh that together to kind of grow forward. As I mentioned, I'm Jason. I'm the director of the Student Access Center. I work a lot with a lot of our students, oversee things, but I also work with a lot of our graduate students, our Great Plains IDEA students. We've worked with them for going on 12 years now. And then also more specifically with students with housing accommodations and our graduate students who are in vet med. Ann is with me, and she's going to talk a little bit today. Ann is our assistant director. She oversees the test center. And with testing accommodations, many of you have probably worked with Ann Pierce and Ann Collett, and with Ann Pierce, and she's done a lot to update some of our pieces and move us online in the last few years too, for some tools for faculty. Natalie's with us, and many of you know her as one of our interpreters on campus, and she coordinates those services with our office. She's also the deaf and hard of hearing advisor for our students, and she works a lot with students in business, education, and agriculture. And I should say, Ann works a lot with our students in human ecology and our online students. And I'm leaving something out, Ann. Leave it to me.
Education and health and human sciences.
There we go. Oh yes, yeah. I said human ecology. Sorry for everybody in health and human services. I just get used to that. Not only today, but future, you can also email us with any questions. Just email the Access Center at ksu.edu. Feel free to send us a question, contact us during the summer. We are still operating primarily with email. If you leave a voicemail, we'll respond to that as well. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. This week, you've been reading about accessibility for students with disabilities within that framework of universal design. And I think of universal design as a really large circle, and accessibility is smaller, but takes up quite a bit of that circle. And looking at those elements, oftentimes early 20 years ago, we used to talk about universal design quite frequently in regards to accessibility, because it helped us all understand the importance of accessibility, not just to those with disabilities, but to all learners on our campuses. And now it's become a really accepted term, and you see it used in universal design for online tools and other resources. Like I said, our guidance is more specific to students registered with a disability using reasonable accommodations through our office. Just something to keep in mind. So a lot of what we're talking about, especially when it comes to captions, is that it's tied to a student who's made that request. Ideally, we'd love to see captions on everything, transcripts for anything that's audio, full accessibility in all of our tools, but we know not always possible, and we know that especially with video creation, it happens consistently every week. And so we look at what are we legally required and what's best for our university, and it's going to help us meet the needs of faculty and students. We're going to focus on 4 different areas to talk about on-campus students moving into remote environments, and that can be flexible, as we know, as we look to the fall, as we experienced in the spring. Those flexible environments. So this fall, it may be that students participating on campus a little bit, online a little bit. But one thing we've known for years is that we have more sections on campus using Canvas and prior with Axio than we have with Global Campus. A lot of courses using that content in one way or another, all very different. Some of our students are used to that, not all necessarily. We're going to talk about just an awareness of students using the accommodations, some of those conversations, things to listen for, exam accommodations as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about text files. Anne's going to talk about that and what that means for accessibility, some key pieces to look for, and Natalie's going to talk about video and audio content. Their content especially, it's helpful as we build a course to be thinking about those resources to make it easier to make it accessible in the future. I'm going to cue to Anne to advance the slides periodically, but and we're going to go through this, but we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. Next slide. So in regards to just general awareness of working with students who have disabilities in online learning, the first and foremost, be understanding. And I think we're all really good at that anymore, because it's being understanding of the students' previous experience with online learning, where they're coming from, the questions they may have, and knowing that this is a unique experience for all of our learners on campus, not just those with disabilities. And when you look at accommodations as part of the process, as we're going to talk, it just complicates things a little bit. It adds another layer, rather, that the students thinking through as they attend classes. When it comes to technology, understand that there are students who are using additional technology on top of what you're presenting. Students may be using your text-to-speech technology. On campus, we have Read and Write that's available for all of our users. And one of the elements in Read and Write is that it does text-to-speech. It takes text, I can highlight it, and it reads back. They might be using that technology on exams, message boards, maybe during a Zoom call. And so if you see a pause or the student's taking longer than you expect, think about them coordinating that technology and they're waiting for it to process information. Another element that kind of comes with that is understand that students may be tracking information back and forth from paper to the screen. And the time it takes to kind of process information, if I look, I'm looking back and forth, and you have to kind of retain information, but also kind of track where that was. And some students with learning disabilities, who oftentimes will print out their information to track through with a pen or pencil and highlight and work with information more kinetically, more with hands-on experience than with just technology. A lot of our students have also had coping skills that they've used, or accommodations or pieces that have helped them in the physical classroom for 12 years on. And that's been disrupted as they've moved to online learning. I've worked with online learners for many years, and one of the pieces we've known is that when we're working with a student and they're taking an online class for the first time, to get to know them, and those accommodations might differ online than on campus. Not for everyone, but for some. Another piece, I know we've said time and time again, but not everybody has the same internet speed that we're used to on campus. So if you think about some of the students using some of the technology, it adds up, it slows things down. So I always say, be understanding, ask questions, ask the student if you have any concerns, and just interact. If you're using Zoom, a couple of the pieces we've noticed is that some students aren't used to being seen all the time, and that can add a layer. They have the distraction that's going on visually as well as auditorily. And so if we have a microphone on randomly, many of us have done this, we have a meeting and somebody's got something going on in the background and it starts to echo in, it can be distracting for some students and take a lot more time to then focus afterwards. So think about ways that you can minimize some of that distraction, and ways that you could, obviously keep microphones silent, as well as shrinking things down so not everybody needs to be seen, and talk to the students about ways they may do that. We're sharing that as well. And if you are working with, a live Zoom situation and you have a student with a note taker accommodation, you may think about recording and allowing them to play that back afterwards. If you're sending information or exams via email, think about how difficult it might be to organize that information. Think about how students used to come in the classroom, discuss it, and kind of keep that information in sync. Now, students may be working on multiple courses at the same time, but they're getting that email and coordinating that with Canvas. Make sure you're clear and concise with the communication across the board. Helps create bullet points, but also kind of process steps as you do that. And just clear and concise. I know myself as I email my students in my online course, I'm guilty of doing the announcement that's really long. I've done a couple of those this summer. And you think about adding bullet points, make it clear and concise and go through there. One thing I've found too, make sure that some of your students are going to be new to Canvas, even though we use it a lot on campus. Not everybody has experience with it. Make sure they're able to find the resources. One thing that we understand, as we've all done, every course is set up slightly differently. And so some courses use different tools. Be clear in what you're going to use. I told my students at the beginning of the semester, I'm going to use announcements. Be sure to look for those announcements and make sure you've set your settings so you're alerted when a new announcement comes out for one of your classes. And also the quizzes. I've had a lot of students contact me and say, okay, I know we have a quiz, but I don't know where it's at and how that's put in there and where they're looking for a test or another assignment. Oh, and the same with rubrics. I meant to mention that. I oftentimes say, let your students know where those rubrics are because some students have a hard time finding those as well. Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit more about exams and different experiences we've had with exams. One piece is we know there are a lot of questions about exams and how to set, especially in an online environment. Go ahead and go to the next slide. When they're in Canvas, we have some information out on our website to provide extra time. Make sure you set that up ahead of time and get it there and build that into the course. A lot of students will check if you have a student email you and say, hey, I got into the test. I know it's the wrong time. I got out really quickly. Make sure you allow them access back into the quiz with the different time. We tell students if it's the wrong time, don't do anything. Make sure you contact your professor first. Otherwise, it can get complicated if the student's done 5 questions and they ran out of time, but they didn't get their time and a half. Now, do we allow them to see the whole thing again, just that portion? Best to just make sure you're prepared from the beginning. A lot of faculty have asked about giving extended time. When we moved online, we got the question a lot, well, I already give a little bit extra time to all my students. It was a 50-minute test in the classroom, but in Canvas, I'm going to give them 60 minutes, or I'm going to give them 90 minutes, because I know they're not used to being online. With the letter of the law, accommodations, we still need to give extra time to the student with an accommodation. So that 60-minute test, let's say, that you've made now 90 minutes for all your students. Well, the student with time and a half is going to get additional time on top of that 90 minutes. A lot of questions around this, and some have asked, I think I have in the later slide, but if we have exams that are emailed to the student, or with Canvas rather, faculty have put together a test where you downloaded it from Canvas. Let's say it was made available at 8 a.m. and it's due at 10. And they said, well, I'm going to add 15 minutes because I know it's going to take additional time to upload that assignment. They're asking it for it to be uploaded. And looking at, okay, I'm going to add an extra time for that. Still, no matter what, it's the student with accommodation gets the extra time on top of that entire time. Next slide. Zoom, we've had a lot of exams in Zoom, and I think it could be appropriate in some situations. As I mentioned earlier, keep in mind how distracting of an environment that can be. We know our classroom can be distracting. A lot of your students are no longer coming to like our test center to be accommodated with distraction-reduced environment. And they certainly can control the environment around them if they're at home in what's maybe a proctored by Zoom test. But keep in mind, there's still the noises and visual elements, and allow those students to shrink things down and explain to students how they can do that. Give them permission to do that. You know, some students, they need to hear from the faculty, oh, it's okay if I do this. And talk with students about how you might work with them to alert them if something were to come up. We know that halfway through a test, faculty will look and say, oh, I meant to write question number 5 differently. Try to minimize that, obviously. Tell students that you're going to send them a chat, and that's going to alert them and that they should pay attention to that maybe once in a while. You get that orange pop-up, alert them that way, or come up with other ways, or try to minimize those disruptions as much as possible otherwise. Just because if a student's trying to keep track, they're spending most of their test time then trying to keep track and looking for that information instead of paying attention to their exam. It's a really new environment for a lot of our students. Next slide. Uh-oh. I think Anne froze. The next slide is going over email, and we've had a lot of faculty who will email a test and send that out to the students and then have them submit that back. And again, be really clear with that process and go over your expectation and walk through that. The piece with that is, again, faculty were saying, well, I'm giving all students more time. Oh, we lost Ann completely. Giving students extra time, and it goes back to that piece of if you're going to give extra time to one student or to all of your students, that student with accommodation, again, needs the excess time. I will try to find our slides real quick and speak for Ann until she gets back on. Here we go. Maybe if there are any questions right now, maybe we could take a look at those while I pull that up.
So there aren't any questions in the chat. I do have the presentation, Jason, if you'd like me to go ahead and pull it up.
Why don't you go ahead and pull it up? It's going to take me a moment. And
yep. Give me just one moment.
Well, one thing, we've had really reliable internet, but for the last couple of days, it's been iffy here as well.
Yeah. All right. Now I have to get to... Where did it go? Oh, that might be Ann back. We find.
Okay, there she is.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
It happens. You know, the other piece, this gives me a good example of things for students. And know that we're contacted by students regularly who are really panicked. And we'll say we're going to contact your advisor, we're going to see if we can help out, but they're at a state of, you know, confusion too. They want that information, they want it quickly, and they try to work their accommodations, and then things go wrong. We'll try to work with you and the student to help, you know, walk things through, but sometimes we look for creative solutions. And by that I mean, let's say somebody lost their internet connection for the last half of the test. Do we have them log in, do the whole test again? Do we grade them for the first portion? Can we be creative in how we look for things? And, you know, if something's missing or misconstrued, you know, can we work with the student? So looking for a fair solution. Things happen. Oh yeah, so Natalie brings up a good point, and this is one thing I meant to add. So also we want to think about the window. So with exams in Canvas, and we see this with email too a little bit, but especially with Canvas, you can set two different parameters for exams. You have the window, and this is the entire time a student may log in for this entire day and go to take the exam. But then the actual exam is 2 hours. When they log in, they only have 2 hours for when it's done. Those who have taught online for a while have experience with that. And so sometimes that window could be 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, but the student always has 2 hours. When we're setting up extra time for an accommodation, we don't change that window. We look at just the time the student has to take the exam. So when they log in, every student has a day. Student with accommodation, without accommodation, that window is a day. But to actually take the test, students have 2 hours, and if they have accommodation, they may have 3 hours. And so the difference between those two pieces, we're typically looking at that. There may be some other circumstances we look at. Sometimes we do have some exams where all students have a couple days to do it. And then we may talk a little bit more specifics, but that's case to case. Thank you, Natalie. If you're extreme. Oh yeah, yep. The I'll make sure I've gone over here. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was going to mention too, because we've seen this with some students in the spring, and certainly we've all had time to adjust. But I mentioned that students have more control over their home environment. Not everybody has that flexibility. If we've had students who return, they're at home, they're no longer in the class, they no longer have babysitting, they may no longer have those other pieces of their life that were in place before COVID-19, and so now they have other duties at home as well. So we want to be flexible with that and keep that in mind. As we go into the fall, we know that those resources may change as well, and so we want to be flexible, and we'll work with the student and you the best we can. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Anne now to talk about textbooks and just all text structures.
Okay, so my apologies for my technology messing up. The first time we did this presentation, my dog was in here snoring. The second time we did this presentation, my husband decided it was a good time to go out and mow the yard. So, and this time my technology decided to fail altogether. So my apologies. But in the few minutes that I have, I will focus on the top 2 or 3 ways you can start to create accessible documents. When you have a student in your course that has the accommodation of alternative text, that is when accessible text becomes a requirement. In part, the accommodation reads, instructors are responsible for posting course materials in an accessible format, such as Microsoft Word, HTML, or accessible PDFs. Today, we're going to look at Word, PowerPoint, and PDFs, and we'll go from easiest to hardest. I want to point out, I don't do this type of production work all the time as far as remediating different documents. So when I do work on documents and I forget how to do certain tasks, many times I go to YouTube and type in what I'm looking for and refresh my memory. There are some very good resources, step-by-step instructions in the Canvas course. Microsoft introduced the accessibility in 2010, and it is available in Word, Excel, Outlook, OneNote, and PowerPoint. The purpose of the checker is to list potential accessibility issues, explain why it might be an issue or it may be an issue, and then most importantly, offer some suggestions on how to fix the issue. You can click on the error or warning and it will highlight the issue in the document. There are 3 classifications. Errors are the most obvious issues, followed by warnings and tips. In the almost 8 years that I have been at K-State, I have yet to have a student they could not access a Word document. That doesn't mean we should ignore best practices. It means that Word is in itself accessible. We as the creators can certainly add things to make it inaccessible. For visual elements, add alt text. Remember the importance of being concise in your description and the relevant content that you want to convey. For instance, if you have a complex chart or a complex table, has 20 columns, 15 rows of numbers, and you don't expect students to memorize all the numbers, what you want them to come away with is that the unemployment rate has gone down for the last 10 years. That is what you want to type in the alternative text box. Headings and paragraph styles give your document structure. You can check this by turning on the navigation pane. Accessible links are important to screen reader users. If your document is only going to be digital, then you don't need the URL listed. If the document is meant to be printed, then you should make, for example, Kansas State University, the hyperlink, and type in the URL in parentheses, but it shouldn't be an active link. To create lists, use the tools that are available in the program, the numbered list or the bulleted list. And then tables should be simple structure with no split cells or merged cells and specify header information. This is just an aside. We should not promote the use of Prezi. I don't know how popular Prezi is anymore. I do know that one college was using it for classroom use a while back. Prezi is another presentation program that is inaccessible, and the company has made no effort to make it compliant. So as an institution, we should avoid promoting those products that are inaccessible. PowerPoint, by its very nature, is visual, so anyone who has low vision or is blind needs to be able to interact with the content differently. I have had to work with a number of PowerPoint presentations because instructors did not follow the first guideline, which is use templates. You can find templates in the program, or you can go to templates.office.com and search for accessible templates. There are several choices out there to satisfy your creative side. Again, use alternative text for visual elements. You can mark decorative visuals as decorative, and a screen reader will ignore it. Color should not be the only means of conveying information. Simple example, if you have a red bus route and a blue bus route, and you show these on a map with the only distinction being the color, you will have people that can't utilize the map. Think of showing one bus route with the color blue and a straight line, and the other with the color red and a broken line. You're conveying the same information in two ways. So I mentioned earlier that we go from easiest to hardest. We're now at the hardest. There are several pieces of the puzzle that have to be put together for a PDF to be accessible. If you are the creator of the PDF, then more than likely you created the document in Word or some other program. If you create an accessible Word document and save the document as a searchable PDF, then the structure stays with the document, and that is a good thing. However, if you scanned in an article and saved as a PDF, then it is more than likely the PDF is an image. A screen reader can't interact with an image, so you simply hear the word image, and that is not helpful to the student. Students who utilize text-to-speech need to be able to select the text. If the PDF is an image and you click on the text, it actually selects the whole page. There isn't a way to select the individual words. The necessary elements of an accessible PDF are the same. You need structure, a logical reading order, appropriate headings, etc. It's just harder to do. Adobe Pro checker function, and it will list errors and warnings, and you can click on the errors and the program will make suggestions on how to fix the issue. If you don't have Adobe Pro, K-State has a site license for Read and Write, which is equipped with Abby Fine Reader, an optical character recognition program. Optical character recognition program takes an image of text and converts it to machine encoded text so that assistive technology can interact with the text. When you have a student with the accommodation of alternative text, remember to request searchable PDF files from the library, and they will be happy to help you. And if by chance a student comes up to you and lets you know that the 20 articles that you just posted to Canvas are inaccessible, please let our office know. I do some production work along with our graduate students, and then if it's more than our office can handle, we will send it out to a third-party vendor. We are here to support not only students, but also instructors. And I think a theme through the presentation is the efforts that you make to make your course content accessible not only helps those students with disabilities, but it helps all the students that are in your course. So I am now going to mute myself, and Natalie will talk about video audio content.
Hello, everybody. Yes, with video audio content, I wanted to go through a few issues. One is the different types of captioning that are available. I'm also want to talk a little bit about how to close caption videos. I also want to discuss external videos that you may want to use, and a few tips on how to create your own video. And you can move to the next slide. Thank you. The different types of captioning that we are that will be used the most are remote real-time captioning and closed captioning. Remote real-time captioning is primarily used for live synchronous sessions such as Zoom meetings, or actually, if we going back to the classroom, you can use real-time captioning in the classroom during an actual lecture, or it may be used for various types of live meetings. This will basically allows the students that are deaf and hard of hearing to participate during live sessions. So they're able to know what's going on at the same time, and not having to wait till after a whole something has already been recorded and then look to see what was said. This will allow them to participate live. Recording sessions, live sessions, as Jason mentioned earlier, is a good way to allow students that may need to have notes to go back and look at the captions and take notes. Students that are deaf or hard of hearing are just not able to divide their attention between trying to read captions and then trying to write something down. This is also helpful for other people that just with other types of disability, learning disabilities, that just may need to go back over something. They may have missed something here. They weren't able to focus at this point, so they didn't, they missed this part of the lecture. So they can go back and look at the captions that have been recorded and make notes. So that's the nice thing about the real-time captioning, is when you do use it, with something like a live synchronous, the captions are recorded along with the session, along with the actual video. So, and then we have closed captioning, which we primarily use for pre-recorded sessions. So a lot of instructors now are recording their classes, and so once they've been recorded, they need to have closed captioning. So this is just basically adding those captions to the video once it has been recorded. And this a lot of times will require a transcript of some sort. So whether that means there is a transcript already available that can be used, or somebody may need to transcribe that video to create a transcript that can be used to then be uploaded to be used for the closed captioning itself. So those are the two primary types of captioning that you will be using, is the remote real-time captioning and the closed captioning. And for those of you that are just interested in other type, what some other types of captioning are, I did go ahead and reference that. There are a few more different types of captioning that may be referred to. Okay, we can go on, Anne. As far as closed captioning videos, the first step I would always take when you are planning your course is, if I'm going to use a video, is it captioned already? You know, that's the easiest solution to our situation, is if we can use videos that have already been captioned. And there's, you know, more and more videos are being captioned now than ever before. So just keep a lookout for videos that you may want to use that have the material that you need that have been captioned. And then if you do want to close caption a short video, there are ways to do that yourself. The way I like to do it is to use YouTube. YouTube has a pretty good system, and there's a couple of ways to do it through YouTube. And I do have a link to a demonstration video if you want to look at that. It does take a little bit of time, but you know, for a short video, it may be easier to just go ahead and caption it yourself. That's always an option. And I have also done a little bit of that for some people for very short videos myself. But again, my time, of course, is somewhat limited, so I can only do so much of that. But for little things here and there, I can certainly assist in just doing short videos. If the video is longer than say 15 minutes, we may need to go to a third-party vendor, and our office is set up to assist professors with being able to get their material sent to a third-party vendor. The most important thing to just know about that is if you do plan on using a third-party vendor, materials do need to be uploaded into MediaSite. So hopefully you are already doing that and keeping your videos in MediaSite. That's the easiest way these third-party vendor would be able to access that video so that they can close caption it. Okay, and again, if you have any questions on, you know, how, more questions on how to get in touch with the third-party vendor, I am available. Okay, and we can go on. Some tips for creating videos. If you are going to create your own video, I would strongly suggest that you start with a transcript. It makes it so much easier because then you already have the transcript, and it prevents you from going off track at times, and allows for more smooth, a more smooth audio, more clear audio when you are able to use a transcript. And then in the end, you already have a transcript that you can actually use to create the closed captionings for that video. And when we are creating those transcripts, we want to remember, we want to keep information concise. We don't want to get too wordy on information because, again, you know, this is this is more stuff that people have to listen to, that people have to try to transcribe. So if we can be concise, that is very helpful, always the best. And that again, by creating this transcript ahead of time, it may help you become a little more concise. So we can, for external videos, if you want to use external videos, that's a lot of us do like to use little clips from YouTube and things like that. You want to make sure that these are closed caption as well. If you're going to have your students watch these videos, they need to have access to those videos. So make sure that these videos are closed captioned as well. And again, you can look for those closed caption symbols to see if they're already closed captioned. If you are using YouTube, you want to be aware that YouTube does use automatic captioning. So there's a lot of material out there that does have captioning, but it's just the automatic captioning. And the automatic captioning is notorious for having errors, unfortunately. The speech to text programs just aren't perfect, and people say things slightly different, you know, tomato, tomato, that sort of thing. And it can be picked up as different words, and misspellings happen. Punctuation is sometimes very weak. So if you do use material that say from YouTube that just has the automatic captioning, make sure that you go and you look at the captioning and see if it's how accurate it is, and you may be able to go in and actually get the corrections going to that automatic captionings, and then that a lot of times will fix the problem. But it would be a matter of going in and maybe having to do a little bit of editing. So we can go through questions, I believe, now. I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jason, and he can specifically address the questions.
Well, Natalie, I wanted to also touch base on YouTube. Those of you who are creating files for other content on campus, especially something like Comevo, I believe it is called, with admissions and with the orientation enrollment program this summer. You can also do that in YouTube, and the same process we use for YouTube to download what's called an SRT file with those captions. You can find a free converter online that'll change it to a VTT caption file that you can upload to something like Comevo. So YouTube really is this wonderfully dynamic program that allows us to create some captioning files really quickly for other resources on campus in addition to MediaSite. That question's been coming up quite a bit lately in some groups, and so just want to make you aware.
And so one other thing on YouTube is, you know, people are concerned about putting their lecture content out there publicly. You would want to keep it as unlisted and then allow the system to do its work. And then you can download the SRT link and upload everything into MediaSite, delete that from YouTube. And then your content is then in a more protected environment where students can't easily share it out as well. So that's something to consider too.
Yes, and you can either delete it, or you can even just put your own video on private in case you feel like you need to go back to YouTube and look at it again. But you know, you can also switch that unlisted setting to the private setting, and that will take care of that as well.
So any other questions at this point, please feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat. Either one is just fine.
Oh, Katie, that's a good question. So Natalie works, we have a live captioner that we work with and we use quite a bit, but I wanted to add on to this, not only Zoom class, but we also use this with Facebook and I don't know, all the live streaming social media tools. There are a lot of them anymore, but use this as well. Natalie, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, this is something we do.
Yeah, one of the options we have used on campus is we have used our real-time captionist, and they are able to come in and live stream the caption as the session is going on. And as Jason mentioned, that works for a couple of not just for Zoom, but a couple of other programs as well. But you are able to basically hire a real-time captionist, and actually you can, I think there is a setting that you can actually do your own captioning as you are going through the Zoom session, which is pretty difficult. But so I don't necessarily suggest that, but
well, and certainly if it's an accommodation, Natalie will reach out to you, let you know there's a student who needs it as accommodation, and then our office will work to get that set up and do the funding for that and take care of that as well. And it's interesting. And the other piece to it, not just a Zoom class, but we have students who don't do sign language, but they're hard of hearing, some are deaf, and then we still use live captioning in the classroom. And our vendor, Net, has this wonderful tool that will actually sync them up with the computer. So if there's a presentation in front of the class, so the captions are going across there. Think about keeping all that visually in frame so you can see the PowerPoint and the text all in one place, and you're not looking to different spots for that information, but it's all in one. It is so cool.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's just like if you were watching a movie on TV, basically, and you can watch the captioning and the movie at the same time.
Yeah.
They do have a program out there now where they can actually put that on the main screen in a classroom, which is really cool. Because basically, primarily, it will just be streamed onto the students' laptop, whatever their whatever device they happen to be using at the time. So,
Barbara, I highly recommend templates for PowerPoint. And I've been speaking about PowerPoint.
They're so ugly.
I know.
I would gladly have a conversation with you and show you what I do, because I know the problem is that it can't be read to someone. But oh my God, templates are, like we teach design.
I know.
Everything our students experience that's taught by us should be carefully created and crafted.
There are ways to do those accessibly. It's a lot of steps, but you can go through and change some of those elements, and we could look at that sometime. When I got into my career, I actually spoke about PowerPoint a lot in the state of Ohio, and regularly at a conference, and we go over this. And there are a couple tools out there that can help make those accessible. But one of the pieces we work with was a lot of emergency centers, I guess, not just EMTs, but also with firehouses and whatnot, and emergency management, and putting information together in big flow charts. There are ways to do it. And I appreciate what you're saying about design. And believe it or not, there are ways to do things that are as designed however you wish and still make them accessible, but it takes a lot of steps for some of that. So, Anne, what are your thoughts?
My go-to has always been when a student can't read the content of the PowerPoint. My go-to thing is to simply make a document and then put slide 1 put the content under there. Slide 2, put the content under there,
Yeah.
so that the student has the information. So that really is my go-to way to make an inaccessible PowerPoint presentation accessible to a student.
Excellent. I can handle that.
Yeah, I was going to say something similarly, because it is, since your field especially is so visual, and you're not just providing the PowerPoint to the student, right? You're then recording a presentation or giving a presentation based off of the PowerPoint. There's so much more that you're adding to that as well. So really creating it or providing it in an alternative format and using the PowerPoint for your main presentation.
Right. Okay. I'm glad I can handle that.
Always remember to, when you're going to update the PowerPoint, update that Word file, because that's where people can make a mistake, and I've seen that in the past. But if you keep that in mind, then you're looking at all learners, and you're doing that from many different viewpoints. I've gotten to know over the years people who can do the coolest things with PowerPoint and still make it accessible. And it was popular on our campus in Akron because, man, I was just reading an article about him too. David, these are the Talking Heads, did a PowerPoint tour years ago, and it was so good. It sold out like that everywhere it went. And so people got behind doing different things with PowerPoint on our campus in Akron, and doing different things. And that's just one thing. You have that flexibility, and it's that balance between the two. And if nobody's asking for an accommodation, you can get away with a lot more, but certainly when accommodation comes up, we want to respond like that. It's accessible.
That's a great point too, Jason. We are not asking all of you to have everything accessible this minute, right? We're asking you to be aware of these accessibility concerns, the accommodations that can come across, so that you're prepared to address those right away, so that you don't have the student come to you and say, you have 20 PDF articles that I can't read any of them. You've already considered, how could I get an accessible PDF of this article ready? Because we've seen some interesting copies of articles where there's hands and and pictures added in, and underlines and highlights and all of those kinds of things interfere with students' ability to see a clean copy. So just being aware of these issues is really an important step.
I think one thing that is worth mentioning is, when you talk about an accommodation, then the legal piece of this is, if you're talking about course content that is not accessible, whatever it may be, document, video, you are not allowed as an instructor to post that until you have an answer to the accessibility piece. So you can't put a video up that doesn't have closed caption if somebody has an accommodation before you have that video captioned. So the barrier has to be brought down before you are allowed to share that with anyone in the class.
Yep, it's got to be equal access for all those in the class, and making sure that you're able to respond. And so that's the one concern that comes up, is when we create content, if we can't do that quickly, then it can cause us to get behind really fast. And so we want to make sure everybody has the same access to all the content, because every student has a right to that access in a timely manner.
Yeah, and that goes back to another reason why it's good. It's just generally good practice, if you can, to create that transcript before you create a video, because then you don't have to worry about that last minute. You've got it available to work with very quickly.
Yep.
Great question, Barbara. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'd also encourage y'all to, as you work with the librarians to get content, to work with them to find accessible content. There are some incredibly knowledgeable folks on our campus who have the means to find that content in an accessible manner and look at alternative resources. when it comes down to captioning something, since 1990, it's been ADA versus copyright at different times. But it comes around to, we have to make it accessible. And so if we have a video that we don't own the copyright to, or that there's trouble getting captions, we're going to look at ways to make that accessible the best we can, regardless of copyright, because we have a responsibility. It's tough to meet both ends meet, but we also work with a lot of librarians to find content. And I say that because in our office, we've gotten files that have been scanned in, mimeographed in, that are no longer readable. And the faculty say, well, I don't no longer have a copy, I just have this physical copy, I don't have anything else. We need to work to get a better copy. Not only is it going to help us when we have to make an accessible document, like a PDF, and hours of graduate student work to read that very closely and type it all back in, but also for your other students in the class and make it easier for them. Any other questions?
Right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you to our team at the Student Access Center. Maybe someday soon we'll be able to see you back in that beautiful building you have pictured there. And we'll be able to see each other as we cross campus. So
It'll be great.
y'all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. We appreciate everybody working together to help out our students. It's a great community.